Thank you for joining us for the Advancing Oceanside Podcast, brought to you by the Oceanside Chamber of Commerce. The Advancing Oceanside Podcast hosts business and community leaders from all industries to help inform, better educate, and ultimately advocate for a prosperous economic climate here in Oceanside. Today on the Advancing Oceanside Podcast, we are so excited to have with us the owner of Olli Salumeria here in Oceanside. Olli Salumeria is a local salami manufacturer specializing in slow-cured fine meats based on old family recipes which have been handed down over 4 generations. Olli, originally from Rome, has created a company that is so much more than meats. During the interview, you'll hear his incredible story and how he has created a company culture that excites his employees. He is passionate about what he does and treats his employees with the utmost respect. We are so blessed to have Olli here in Oceanside. And with that, our host, Scott Ashton.
Hello and welcome to the Advancing Oceanside Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Ashton, CEO of the Oceanside Chamber of Commerce. And today I'm very pleased to have with us Oliviero Colmignole, owner of Olli Salumeria here in Oceanside. While his family history in the salami business dates back for generations before Olli was born, Olli's story begins in 1978 when he was born in Rome into a family of salami makers. As a boy, Olli spent plenty of time at his grandfather's prosciutto and salami factories, and by an early age, he picked up a lot of knowledge about how to cure various meats. In 2000, Olli joined his grandfather's company and started learning the traditional techniques of creating an everlasting salami filled with history, tradition, patience, and quality. 10 years later, Olli decided to start his own company in Virginia, Olli Salumeria, and there began the journey which leads to today. Olli Salumeria moved to Oceanside, California to expand the company and products into an 80,000 square foot facility producing over 100,000 pounds of salami a week. We had a chance to visit with Olli and his team recently to interview them on a workforce development project we were doing, and it was quite evident that the 3-minute video was not nearly enough time for Olli to tell his story. So Olli, thanks for being with us here today to share more of your story. We're very excited to learn more about you.
Well, thanks for hosting, Scott. I'm excited to be here as well and to share my story and with you all, I guess.
Yeah, so I shared a little bit about your bio and about you personally, but can you take us back into your family history and talk a little bit about how the passion for the salami business began?
Yeah, so it's quite an interesting story. It started really substantially to become big after the Second World War. My grandfather and his father before him, I guess, used to do this job in a little town called Norcia, which is in Umbria, which is about a 2-hour car drive from Rome. And, after the Second World War, there was in the major cities, and Rome being the capital, that there was a big deal of hunger because, there was difficulty bringing the food from the country into the city. And so my grandfather actually bought a truck from the U.S. Army when they left, and with that he used to go around and get food in the countryside and bring it back to Rome and sell it to Rome. And he eventually opened a store, and then in the store he started doing some butchering, fresh sausage and such. And then from there they opened 2 stores and 3 stores, and then eventually they started a little facility just on the outskirts of Rome where they would start doing dry cured products. Now, you got to think that in Italy, the culture of salumi, prosciutto, salami, that kind of things, all comes from that Emilia-Romagna region, which is really, Bologna to Modena, Parma, where you hear the Parma hams, and then some San Daniele. So it's really based in the north of the country. And he was a bit of an outlier starting this kind of processing in Rome. But nevertheless, he was successful, he was determined, and he grew the company to being quite large, eventually buying prosciutto plants in Parma, buying prosciutto plants in San Daniele, which is next to Venice, and he grew the business. From there, in the 1980s, he wanted to export to the US market, but at the time you could not import meat from Europe, and so the only way to sell in America was to open a facility in the US and process here. And so in 1986, he shipped my father over to open the facility. I actually came along together with my mother and my sister, and we all moved to Richmond, Virginia, where we opened Fiorucci Foods USA. We stayed there for a while, then eventually my parents kind of divorced, so I went back, but I did some high school here in the States, which was great. And then I kind of did back and forth through the years, went to university, and then eventually joining the family business. And at the time, my grandfather said, you know what, why don't you go and study and work in the States, as it's a more dynamic market. There's more going on, there's more growth. You have to think, in Italy, salami and prosciutto, it's a very saturated market. I don't know how much more salami people can eat in Italy than what they already do, I guess. And so here it expands a bit more. So I came here around the 2000s, but then my grandfather, I guess, he had 3 daughters. None of them were really willing to take the helm of a company. And so eventually he sold in 2005 the business to a private equity. I stayed along a little bit, about 5 years. I learned a lot. I learned a lot of what not to do with a business and some things to do with a business. But mainly what I saw was kind of a space in the market. And the space was for a more traditional product, like you would find more in Europe and in Italy, and also a space. So 2 things. One is going back to a more traditional product, and then the other one is having an attention to animal husbandry, and also trying to do a product that is natural without nitrates. And so, and the reason for the traditional product is because, Fiorucci was an Italian company, but you have to think that there were quite a few Italian companies that came over to the US in the 80s. There was us, there was Citterio, there was Beretta, which we all find in the market now. But when they came in the 80s, the American palate wasn't really ready for a full European salami experience. And so they kind of had to adapt their recipes and their processes to that kind of palate. And I think the US's consumer has really evolved in its taste appreciation, and now is looking for more genuine experience, I guess. And so when I was looking around, there were people like Framani, which is in San Francisco, which Paul Bertolli was the founder, and he was a very, very famous chef. And he really did a traditional Italian product. And so he kind of inspired me. And so I left the family, well, then it wasn't a family business anymore, but I left the business that my family founded, and I started a small, essentially, it was like a test kitchen. It was less than 10,000 square feet. We got a little grinder, a little mixer, and we started producing. And we were lucky because we were buying, having this attention for animal husbandry. We were buying from a farmer that also sold to Whole Foods, and so that got us introduced to Whole Foods, and we went nationwide with Whole Foods in about 9 months, and from there, Whole Foods is really a catapult for a lot of small businesses. And once you get into Whole Foods, then kind of other retail stores want you as well. And so we grew relatively quickly. And eventually we were like, well, okay, this is not a test anymore. Seems like a proper business. Seems like, the consumer out there has an appetite for the kind of product that we can produce and appreciates it, and they're willing to pay a little extra for both the animal husbandry and the natural part of it. And so we decided with my wife, where are we going to go? Because, where we build this next facility is kind of where our kids are going to grow up, schooling, lifestyle. And my sister used to live here in San Diego, and we used to come visit her. And, we really fell in love with San Diego, especially with North County, San Diego, a bit more relaxed. My wife is from South Africa, from Port Elizabeth. So it's very, very similar environment. And so we decided to come to San Diego. And eventually we decided for Oceanside. And, we got a piece of land and we built a 80,000 square foot facility. So you can imagine it was a big jump. It was a very scary jump going from, leasing 10,000 feet to building a 80,000 square foot facility. It had its complex moments. But we persevered, and the couple of years, it was tough because your overhead goes through the roof and everything. But we found Oceanside was a great place. They welcomed us well, and we persevered. Essentially, that's the word I would use. Yeah. And from there, we started growing. First, we could offer more products. So while in Richmond, we could only do one product, which essentially is what we call a small salami, which is a chub, which, the consumer has to peel because it has the casing on, it has the mold and all of that. Instead, when we came here, we could offer a more variety of products. And that's what we did. So things like pre-sliced salami, which is already cut in a pouch, ready to use. And then eventually, a few years after, we developed a snack pack, which is, if you can imagine, like a 2-ounce pack where you have cheese, crackers, and salami. So you have an on-the-go snack. And then after that, we also developed more focused on entertainment. So a 12-ounce pouch with olives, cheese, and salami. And so that's how the company is really moving along now, more into snacking and entertaining, kind of. Okay.
So that entrepreneurial spirit that ran through your family obviously continues with you and has only grown. Just backing up a little bit, apart from the business end of it, what was it like for you growing up in Rome?
Rome is, in Italy they say Rome is the most beautiful city in the world, but they're a bit biased. But Rome is a wonderful place. First of all, it's got history just pouring out of its pores everywhere you turn. There's a historical site. My grandfather actually used to live on the Appian Way, which is this historically famous road where the Roman generals used to parade when they came back from the wars. And to tell you the truth, as a kid, I used to go around with a metal detector. And, apart from the buckets of nails and lead piping, because all the piping used to be of lead, every so often I'd pull up a Roman coin. So that always excited me. And it's a special experience. I mean, Rome is a special city. It's been around for 2,000 years. It's beautiful. It's got its issues because, of course, the infrastructure is what it is. The center is what it is. But it always will have a space in my heart, I guess.
Yeah. So back to the business. What would you say are a couple things that sets Olli Salumeria apart from your competition?
Okay, so let's start with first of all the animal husbandry. So, we try to do a product where we let the raw materials speak, and in our case, the most important raw material is pork. And in order to have good pork, you really have to have a pig that is raised well. and is not kind of factory farmed. And so sourcing of our meat is really important. And so we try to source meat that is not factory farmed. Another thing that we have been always from the beginning until now is all our meats are never administered. So the hogs are never administered antibiotics. I don't know if you know, but there's more antibiotics being given to animals than to people in the US. And that fosters these super bacteria essentially that are resistant to antibiotics, and it's a real issue. So we both are interested in how the pig is grown, but as well as the fact that they're not administered antibiotics. So that's one thing that sets us apart. The other thing is on the ingredient side, we try to use no nitrates. So we use vegetables which are higher in nitrates instead of using chemical nitrates in our process. But the real thing that sets us apart, I think, is the process per se, because salami essentially is a fermented product. So, it's never cooked, but it becomes safe to eat through 3 different steps, really. One is the fermentation. 2 is the salt, because, salted meats is how we kept meats for thousands of years before fridges. And 3 is the dry. So we dry it. So when we ferment at a low temperature. So imagine that you take raw meat, you mix it with the spices, and then we ferment it at 70 Fahrenheit. So that is a real low fermentation, and we try not to drop the pH too much. So pH is a level to read acidity in things. And so what we do is what everybody does essentially is we put in starter culture, which eats sugar and creates lactic acid, and that lowers the pH of a product. Now, the higher you go in temperature and the lower you go in pH, the quicker and easier it is then to dry the salami after. But then you also get this different texture, and because it dries too quickly, you don't develop that aroma of the aging meat and drying of the meat. And so while our competitors go with a high temperature fermentation, so think something in like 98, 90, in the 90s of Fahrenheit, we ferment at about 70, so much lower. And also our final pH is around 5.2 when they go to 4.7. And so because of that difference in fermentation, what we might take 3 months to dry after fermentation, they can do it in like 3 weeks, 4 weeks. But again, if you don't give time to the product, then the product doesn't have the time to really create the flavor, to develop the flavor. And so those are the main differences, I think, the raw material and the difference in process.
Yeah, and that investment of time is obviously a big deal. The 3 months, and that's quite an investment into each product.
Yeah, you're holding a lot more. You're holding more meat hanging, which means more dollars hanging. I always say, it's bad, but it's not as bad as whiskey.
So I was reading about your manufacturing process and how you use mold. And so most people think of mold in a negative way, but there's good use for mold. Can you talk about that and how that's used in your process?
Yeah. So we actually put mold on our product, and the mold we put, think of it like on a brie as well, like on a cheese. So we actually use the same kind of mold that they use on a brie. And what that does is a few things. One, it helps from a flavor point of view, because mold adds flavor, especially the mold that we put. And it helps also maintaining that pH so it doesn't go too acidic. But really, what it really does also is it inhibits bad mold to grow. And so, and this happens with mold. So we put good mold on it so that we don't have, green or yellow mold. So what you want is a nice white bloom mold. And we do that with a mold on the outside, but we actually do it on the inside as well, where we actually, our starter culture, which is the thing that lowers the pH, it doesn't only have one starter culture in it. It has like a cocktail of 4 or 5 different starter cultures. And those also grow, and the meat essentially is alive because we never cook it. And so because you don't cook it, because you don't sterilize it, you want to make sure that you have good bacteria growing in it instead of pathogens. And so we do that by putting good things in it, kind of. And so it's really creating a competition to pathogens and to things that can spoil the product.
Okay. Well, you touched on a little bit on your ingredients earlier, but I was reading that everything from the meats to the spices to the packaging that you source, you source that locally. Can you talk a little bit about why that's important to you?
Yeah, well, we say it on a product. We're proud to be made in the U.S. and we want to stand behind that. And so we source a lot of the packaging stuff. Actually, comes directly from Oceanside, like labels and things like that. The meat comes more from the Midwest, just because they grow hogs next to where corn is, essentially. And but essentially, we want to promote the fact that we are made here and we're proud of it, and we want to support our suppliers as locally as possible.
Yeah, and there must, with everything we're hearing about supply chain issues, it sounds like there's a lot of benefit to working locally as well.
Yeah, and we actually had quite a few opportunities where competitors of ours, had suppliers that were shorting them from overseas, and we could grasp that opportunity instead of a more local supply chain to go grab their business.
So, you recently invited us into your business to interview some of your employees for a workforce development project that we're doing, and it was really evident that your business is a great place to work. Can you talk a little bit about that environment and how you foster, that type of environment that makes your employees love being there?
Well, I think it's all about how people treat each other, and this is a family business. My daughter worked here for a few summers too before she went out to university, and essentially, I think at the end of the day, you treat people well and with respect, and they'll give you back the same. And so that's what I try to do. And I think that trickles down throughout the whole company.
Yeah, it's pretty simple, but not everyone does it, right?
Yeah, it's pretty simple, but what we always try to say is, when there's a problem, and trust me, we have many problems to fix because that's how business works. It's not okay who did it and why. But it's okay, how can we prevent it, and how can we make the process better? So I think it's that kind of attitude that you have to foster in order to have a good work environment around you.
So, some things that you have going for you obviously is good people, but one of the things that stood out to me when I first visited your business shortly after you guys opened up in Oceanside was the technology involved, like the robots that move the meat racks from one part of the building to the other. And can you just talk a little bit about the technology that you're using and just some of the changes in the technology?
Yeah, sure. So let's start with the fact that making salami is thousands of years old, so there's no trick to it. The way we make salami is a bit more expensive because of that extra time in drying, because of the quality of the meat we buy. And so we really have to try to save costs so that we can offer an affordable product from using technology. And so what we thought was important was not to skimp on the quality of the meat, not to skimp on the process with cutting the time short, but really investing money where we could automate and find more efficiency. And so, for example, what you saw is essentially we have this automated transport that moves the racks of salami. And you got to think each rack of salami is about 18 feet tall and holds about 4,000 pounds of salami. And but then again, that is not just a moving thing, because moving is pretty easy. What that machine actually does, this AGV, actually goes, it has a scale, and so it lifts the salami, and we can monitor how it's drying, how much weight it lost. Because you got to think that 4,000 pound rack of weight of salami, by the time it's ready, it lost 30% of its weight. And so it's important for our costing, for example, to measure, when do we reach that 30%? And so that little guy goes out every night, measures every rack. And then, we come in the morning, we look at our system and says, hey, this rack in that room has reached that 30% drying target. So we pull it out and we pack it. Well, if we didn't have that, we would go off of time, and maybe sometimes we would dry at 32%, sometimes we would dry at 35%. And that extra 5% at the end of the year adds up in extra cost, essentially. So we try to save money by investing in technology, not sacrificing our raw materials, not sacrificing our process. And like this, we try to deliver a product that is affordable, but is of high quality.
So obviously, technology plays a big role, and it's changed your business and created efficiencies that weren't available generations ago.
No.
But what has stayed the same? Like, what has carried over from generation to generation?
Well, the process. So the process is exactly the same for how it's been done for thousands of years. I mean, now we have a bit of a better control on the rooms and the temperature and the humidity. But the fact that you grind good meat, that's how you start, and that's how they did it in the past. You put good spices inside. So, for example, we use fresh garlic cloves. But our wine is, I don't know if you saw it, but it's still bottled wine that you could drink at the table. So I think using good raw materials is the same. I think that fermentation process that we do at such a low temperature is really what makes us the same as our ancestors, because everybody's changed to a higher temperature, a more aggressive fermentation. And instead, this low temperature, long drying is what really connects us to the past.
So along those same lines, was it, in the past, was it about the same length of a process, about the 3 months that you were talking about?
It was about the same length in a process. Of course, nowadays, before, while they might have put it in a what do you call it in English? In like a big basement or something, and you would open the doors based on the temperature and things like that. Now we have rooms that actually control temperature and humidity. And you also got to think, like way back, this kind of product was only done in the winter. So your pigs being born kind of early spring, they got big, they fattened up, and then in autumn they would be slaughtered. And because they didn't have control and they didn't have refrigeration, they would do the processing in the winter and then have it for the next season, essentially.
Okay. So, and this is something I ask a lot of our businesses, is in the last year and a half, how has COVID impacted your business, and what changes have you guys had to make?
Well, COVID was scary. I remember sitting here and kind of, skipping through the news and things like that. And it was scary. We didn't know what was going to happen. What would happen to demand, what would happen to supply. how would we be able to stay open? But we kind of jumped on it as soon as we could. So we implemented early on, social distancing. We moved breaks out so that there would be less people in the break room. We had to take some people off the lines so that we would have more space. And, we sacrificed some throughput. But I think all the actions we took, for example, we had 2 shifts. And, usually one shift comes and the other one is kind of coming away. We put an hour in between each shift so that we could clean the break rooms and all of that. And so all the actions we took enabled us to never close, essentially. So we operated every day, which was good. And our competitors weren't the same. And even there, we gained some placement. As it relates to the market, fortunately, we are majority retail, so we don't do a lot of food service. Let's say we used to do maybe 15% food service, and that food service business essentially, disappeared overnight. So that was a bit hard. But a lot of our competitors are a lot more heavy in food service. We tend not to be on food service with restaurants are very very sensitive to price, and our price is a bit higher because of everything we talked about before. But overall, COVID has been challenging. But I consider ourselves lucky to be in an industry that actually grew during COVID, and it's been so random, and you've had so many businesses that have been affected so negatively, some good, and I guess we were just lucky to be one of those that wasn't affected badly, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's great. You were able to do what you needed to do to figure it out and keep things rolling.
Yeah.
So any future plans for growth or expansion that you could share?
Yeah, I mean, we're expanding all the time. It seems like it's never ending. But, we just closed the 3rd quarter, and year to date, we're up 40% in pounds over last year. And so we are adding more dry rooms. We're adding more slicing lines. We're adding more grinding lines. And so we are buying a lot of equipment to create more capacity in the current building. We just leased 40,000 square foot just down the road from here at 1322 Rocky Point Drive. So we're expanding as fast as we can.
That's great, and I'm really glad that you're doing it here in Oceanside. I know you had a lot of choices available to you when you first moved out to San Diego area. So thanks for choosing us.
Yeah, well, we came here because we liked it, essentially. We looked at Otra Mesa, we looked everywhere, but we ended up here because we like it.
So, final question. We know that running a business is not easy, but obviously the entrepreneurial spirit just runs through your family. So, what advice do you have for other entrepreneurs?
I think the most important thing is to move forward, I guess. There's going to be times where things are hard, times where things look unsurpassable. But if you take problems one step at a time, you got to have a vision of where you want to get, and you just got to overcome the hurdles that are between here and there, kind of.
Yeah, no, that's great advice, and it's obvious that you're implementing your own advice in your company. So
we try.
Yeah. So Olli, thank you so much for spending time with us today to share your story, and really appreciate it. I've had a chance to obviously sample your food on many occasions, and I love it. And it's great to have such an amazing product made here in Oceanside.
Well, thank you for the possibility of sharing our story, Scott. It's greatly appreciated.
All right. Take care, Olli. Thank you.
Bye, guys. Bye, Scott.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Advancing Oceanside Podcast, brought to you by the Oceanside Chamber of Commerce. Continue with us on our journey to help inform, better educate, and ultimately advocate for Oceanside. You can view all of our other podcasts on any podcast listening locations, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit our YouTube channel. And don't forget to subscribe to catch all the latest updates on all things Oceanside. Join us next week as we host another influential leader from our community.